Yuya Sakaki, the master of the pendulum. Though fun-loving and unassuming, this young duelist harbored a dark secret as the reincarnation of Zark, the supreme king that nearly brought about the end of humanity. After reuniting with his fellow spiritual remnants, Yuya carved out a new destiny for himself, bringing cheers and tears to audiences as he dueled his way to the very top. The story of Yu-Gi-Oh! Arc 5 ended just 7 years ago, but in that short time, the game has changed. So today, we're going to be taking a look at the cards that Yuya might use now if his adventures continued into the modern day. So as one of the Supreme King Zark's spiritual reincarnations, Yuya inherited one of the 4-dimension dragons, the Odd Eyes Dragon, which magically reformed to become the Odd Eyes Pendulum Dragon once the power of pendulum summoning was discovered. As a card that's directly tied to Yuya's very being, it's unlikely he'd ever remove it from his lineup, and it will continue on as the heart and soul of this deck profile. This monster doubles any battle damage that it inflicts to its opponent, and its pendulum effect allows the user to reduce any damage involving one of their pendulum monsters to 0. It can also be tributed from the pendulum zone at the end of the turn to add a pendulum card with 1500 or fewer attack points from the deck to the hand. Odd Eyes can be upgraded through the power of the Odd Eyes Advent Ritual, allowing Yuya to summon Odd Eyes Pendulum Graph Dragon, a ritual pendulum monster who can be either ritual or pendulum summoned. It burns the enemy for 300 points of damage each time they summon from the extra deck, and when your enemy activates a spell card, you can move Pendulum Graph Dragon to the Pendulum Zone to negate that spell and special summon an Odd Eyes monster from the extra deck. Its pendulum effect lets you add a ritual spell card from the deck or grave to your hand, then return this card back to your hand, meaning it can basically source its own ritual spell the same turn that you draw it if you throw it into the Pendulum Zone. But while Odd Eyes is Yuya's soul animal, his archetype of choice is the Performapals, many of whom have crossed over with the Odd Eyes family since the end of Arc 5. So we'll give him Performapal Odd Eyes Dissolver, Performapal Odd Eyes Seer, and Performapal Odd Eyes Synchron. Performapal Odd Eyes Dissolver's main effect triggers during a battle involving one of your pendulum monsters, allowing you to special summon it and prevent your own monster from being destroyed. And its second effect acts as a polymerization card, allowing you to fusion summon using monsters from your hand, field, or pendulum zone. Its pendulum effect is similar, but is limited to fusion summoning a dragon monster using cards from your hand or your field. Performapal Odd Eye Seer has 2 effects, depending on which battle position it's in. If it's in attack mode, you can banish it to special summon another Performapal or an Odd Eyes monster in your grave. Or, if it's in defense mode, you can move a Performapal or an Odd Eyes Pendulum monster from your deck to either your extra deck or to your graveyard. And its pendulum effect allows it to tribute itself to add a Performapal or Odd Eyes card in the graveyard back into the hand. Performapal Odd Eyes Synchron is a pendulum tuner monster. When it's normal summoned, you can special summon a level 3 or lower Performapal or Odd Eyes monster in the grave without its effects. It can special summon a monster from the Pendulum Zone to the main field without its effects as well, but you're required to immediately perform a Synchro Summon using that monster and this card. And Synchron's pendulum effect changes a face-up Performapal or Odd Eyes monster you control into a level 1 tuner monster once per turn. Then we have the non-Odd Eyes Performapals, with those being Performapal Monkey Board, Performapal Duelist Extraordinaire, and Performapal Skull Crobat Joker. Performapal Monkey Board can be discarded to reveal a Performapal or Odd Eyes monster in your hand and reduce its level by 1 until the end of the turn, both in the hand and on the field. Its pendulum effect changes its pendulum scale to 4 unless there's another Performapal monster in your other pendulum zone. During the main phase, if this card was activated, you can add a level 4 or lower Performapal monster from the deck to your hand. Performapal Duelist Extraordinaire lets you add a Supreme King Dragon, a Supreme King Gate, or Soul of the Supreme King card from the deck to the hand when it inflicts battle damage. During each standby phase, if its effect is activated, each player can banish a spell card from the deck, and once per turn, an attacked player can add a banished spell to the hand, immediately discard it, and then negate the attack. So basically, this effect lets players trade spell cards from the deck in exchange for battle protection. And its pendulum effect allows it to be returned to the hand and banish a spell card from the deck when a monster battles another monster. For that battle, your monster can't be destroyed and your battle damage is halved. And Performapal Skull Crobat Joker lets you add a Performapal monster, a Magician Pendulum monster, or an Odd Eyes monster from the deck to the hand when it's summoned. Its pendulum effect restricts its player to only being able to pendulum summon from one of these 3 archetypes. So that takes us to the Magicians. When Yuya first discovered pendulum summoning, the Stargazer and Timegazer magicians already in his deck were transformed into pendulum monsters, Stargazer Magician allows you to special summon a pendulum monster that was sent from the field back to your hand, essentially negating the effect of sending it back to the hand in the first place, though it can only do this if you control no other cards. And its pendulum effect prevents the enemy from activating spell cards when one of your pendulum monsters battles. And Timegazer Magician negates any card effect that would destroy a card or cards in your pendulum monster zone once per turn. Its pendulum effect requires that you control no monsters to place it in the pendulum zone, and prevents your opponent from activating traps when a pendulum monster you control battles. So in effect, if you have both Stargazer and Timegazer Magicians in your pendulum zones, you have the ability to negate both a spell card and a trap card that your opponent might try to activate when one of your pendulum monsters goes into battle. Unfortunately, both of these magicians have a drawback pendulum effect, stating that if there is no other magician or odd eyes card in your other pendulum zone when they're on the field, their pendulum scales change to the number 4, making them far less useful for pendulum summoning. These two were with Yuya from the very beginning of Arc 5 up until his very last duels, but he did add a few more magicians as they became available, and we're going to give him a few more on top of that, including Harmonizing Magician, Tuning Magician, Jiangxi Magician, and Jiangsheng Magician. Harmonizing Magician and Tuning Magician are both tuner monsters. Harmonizing can only be used for a fusion, synchro, or Xyz summon if all the other materials being used are magician pendulum monsters. When it's pendulum summoned, you can also special summon a magician pendulum monster from the deck without its effects. Its pendulum effect gives 100 attack points and defense points to all monsters you control for each pendulum magician in your extra deck. Tuning Magician is one of our only non-pendulum magicians in this lineup, but its first effect can only be activated if you have magicians in both of your pendulum zones. It can be special summoned from the hand or grave, but is banished when it leaves the field. Its second effect is a bit of a drawback. When it's summoned, your opponent gets 400 of your life points. Similarly, Jiangxi and Jiangsheng Magicians are all about supporting Xyz summoning, and their pendulum effects seem to be designed to work in tandem with one another. Jiangxi Magician's pendulum effect allows you to use an Xyz monster on your field as material for another Xyz summoning, using its rank in place of a level, while Jiangsheng's pendulum effect allows it to match an Xyz monster on your field's rank with the level of a high-level monster you control. So in essence, Jiangsheng allows you to change an Xyz monster's rank to match a monster you already control, while Jiangxi lets you overlay those two monsters together for a high-level Xyz summoning. Jiangxi Magician's regular effect can negate the effect of a light monster on the field each turn, while Jiangsheng Magician can't deal battle damage to your opponent, but it can match its attack points to another monster you control. And then we have the 4 magicians that appear to be counterparts to the 4-dimension dragons, and those are Double Iris Magician, Purple Poison Magician, White Wing Magician, and Black Fang Magician. Double Iris Magician is treated as a Pendulum Dragon card, and can be used to add a Pendulum Graph card from the deck to the hand when it's destroyed, making it a ritual support card. Its pendulum effect allows you to tribute it to double any battle damage a Dark Spellcaster monster does when battling an enemy monster for the rest of the turn, but it doesn't include doubling direct attack damage. Purple Poison Magician is treated as a Fusion Dragon card. When it's destroyed by battle or card effect, it can take another card on the field with it. Its pendulum effect allows it to tribute itself to power up a Dark Spellcaster monster on your field by 1200 points. White Wing Magician is a tuner monster and is always treated as a Synchro Dragon monster. It's banished if it's used as a Synchro material, but its pendulum effect allows it to tribute itself to negate an enemy effect that targets a Dark Spellcaster monster that you control. And Black Fang Magician is always treated as an Xyz Dragon card. When it's destroyed, it can special summon a Dark Spellcaster in your grave. Its pendulum effect allows it to tribute itself to cut the attack points of an enemy monster in half until the end of the turn. And the last of the monsters in the main deck are kind of interesting. By the time Arc 5 ended, we see Yuya using all of his dimensional counterparts cards, but he doesn't embrace his progenitor's power, the power of the Supreme King Zark. But as he does have all the pieces of Zark inside of him when the show ends, it stands to reason that he could embrace that power. And so we're going to say that he did. So say hello to Astrograph Sorcerer and Chronograph Sorcerer. Astrograph was a monster spirit that Zark used to fuse with the spirits of his 4-dimensional dragon cards, allowing him to become the Supreme King in the first place. It appears to be a more powerful form of the Stargazer Magician, and is possibly the spirit that facilitated the creation of Pendulum Summoning for Yuya at the very beginning of Arc 5. It can be special summoned from the hand if a card that you control is destroyed. On the turn that it's summoned, you can choose a monster in your grave, extra deck, or banished zone that was destroyed this turn, and add a monster with the same name from your deck to your hand. The Chronograph Sorcerer, on the other hand, never appeared in the anime, but appears to be a counterpart to Astrograph and an evolved form of the Timegazer Magician. It can also be special summoned from the hand when another card you control is destroyed, and at the same time, you can special summon another monster from your hand. Both of these cards share the effect that they can be banished along with a Pendulum, Fusion, Synchro, and Xyz Dragon monster in order to summon Supreme King Zark. Astrograph's Pendulum effect lets you destroy it in order to swap in Stargazer Magician from the hand or deck, and Chronographs does the exact same thing with the Timegazer Magician. We also have both of Zark's Pendulum Gates, Supreme King Gate Infinity and Supreme King Gate Zero. Zark used these Pendulum cards in his duel with the Lancers, allowing him to summon any monsters between 1 and 12 at the same time. Both of these cards have similar effects, allowing their user to tribute them and another card on their field to special summon a dragon from the extra deck with no effects and 0 attack and defense points. For Supreme King Gate 0, that dragon can be a Fusion or Synchro monster, while for Supreme King Gate Infinity, it has to be an Xyz or Pendulum monster. In both cases, the special summon dragon cannot be used for Synchro or Xyz summoning. Both cards share an effect where if they would be destroyed by battle or card effects, they can be moved to the Pendulum Zone instead. Gate 0's Pendulum effect prevents you from taking damage if you control Supreme King Zark, and if Supreme King Gate Infinity is in your other Pendulum Zone, you contribute both cards to add Polymerization or another Fusion card from your deck to your hand. Meanwhile, Gate Infinity's Pendulum effect prevents you from Pendulum summoning if you already control another monster, but if you control Supreme King Zark, you can target an enemy monster and gain life points equal to its attack points. Supreme King Gate Magician is the master of the Pendulum Gates, allowing you to special summon it if you control a Supreme King Gate card and destroy a Pendulum, Fusion, Synchro, or Xyz Dragon card in your extra deck. When it's summoned, you can add a card that mentions Supreme King Zark to your hand from the deck, so long as it isn't a spellcaster. Its Pendulum effect protects Supreme King Zark from being banished by enemy card effects. It can also sacrifice itself from the Pendulum Zone to place another Supreme King Gate card in its place. We also have the two Supreme King Dragons, Lightworm and Darkworm. When Lightworm is summoned, you can add a Supreme King Dragon or Supreme King Gate card from the extra deck to the hand, and then immediately Synchro or Xyz summon a Supreme King Dragon monster. If a Pendulum monster you control is destroyed while Lightworm is face up in your extra deck, you can add Lightworm back into your hand. Its Pendulum effect lets you special summon it from the Pendulum Zone to the main field if you control Supreme King Zark and another monster is special summoned. When this happens, you can change Lightworm's level and attribute to match another Pendulum monster you control. Similarly, Darkworm can add a Supreme King Gate monster from the deck to the hand when it's summoned. It can also be special summoned from the grave if you control no monsters, and its Pendulum effect lets you place a Supreme King Gate monster in your Pendulum Zone if you control no monsters, but then you can only Pendulum summon dark monsters for the rest of the turn. And that finally brings us to the end of monsters in the main deck. Moving on to spells, we've got your bog standard Polymerization card for Fusion summoning. We have Odd Eyes Fusion and Odd Eyes Advent to facilitate Fusion and Ritual summoning with Odd Eyes monsters specifically. We've got Amazing Pendulum, Extra Pendulum, and Pendulum Evolution. Amazing Pendulum lets you add 2 Magician Pendulum monsters with different names from the extra deck to your hand if your Pendulum Zones are currently empty. Extra Pendulum lets you Pendulum summon a second time in one turn, but only lets you pull other Pendulum cards that have made their way into your extra deck. Pendulum Evolution is a continuous spell card that lets you shuffle one Pendulum monster from your hand into the deck to add another Pendulum monster with 2,500 attack points to your hand. It also allows Supreme King Zark to attack all monsters your opponent controls if you special summoned a Pendulum monster that was face down in the extra deck. Star Pendulum Graph prevents your opponent from targeting spellcasters with spell cards. It also lets you add a Magician Pendulum monster from your deck to your hand if another one you control leaves the field. Duelist Alliance lets you add a Pendulum monster, spell, or trap from the deck to the hand if only one of your Pendulum Zones is full. Wings of Light lets you add a Supreme King Dragon or Gate monster from the deck to the hand, unless you already control Supreme King Zark, in which case you can just special summon that monster instead. Smile Universe lets you summon as many face-up Pendulum monsters from the extra deck as possible, but their effects are negated, and your opponent gains life points equal to all of those monsters' attack points. Plus, you can't summon anything else or attack on the same turn. And Sky Iris is a field card that prevents the enemy from targeting Magicians, Performapals, or Odd Eyes cards in your Pendulum Zones with card effects. Each turn, you can sacrifice one face-up card on the field to add an Odd Eyes card from your deck to your hand. And that just leaves us with the traps. Miracle of the Supreme King only works if you already control Supreme King Zark and has 3 effects that you can choose from. 1. You can sacrifice Zark to summon an Odd Eyes Pendulum monster or a light attribute Supreme King Zark from your deck or extra deck. 2. You can place a face-up Pendulum monster in your extra deck into the Pendulum zone. Or 3. You can set a quick play spell directly from your deck. Soul of the Supreme Celestial King lets you tribute a Spellcaster Pendulum monster with exactly 2,500 attack points to fusion summon Supreme King Zark by banishing its materials from your hand, deck, extra deck, field, or graveyard, but its effects are negated unless you already have a banished Pendulum, Fusion, Synchro, or Xyz dragon monster. Pendulum Reborn lets you bring back a Pendulum monster in your grave or extra deck. And Time Pendulum Graph prevents your opponent from targeting your spellcasters with traps. Once per turn, you can destroy both a Magician Pendulum monster that you control and an enemy card, but if the enemy somehow gets out of it and you didn't end up destroying 2 cards with this effect, you can send a card on the field to the grave. So basically you get to double dip if your enemy sidesteps the first pass. Moving on to the side deck, this is where we've got the rest of Yuya's Performapals and the majority of his Supreme King powers. For the Performapals, we've got Misdirector, Lizard Draw, Hip Hippo, Flip Hippo, Trump Witch, Pendulum Sorcerer, and Gatling Ghoul. Performapal Misdirector is a tuner monster who can't be targeted for attacks while you control an Odd Eyes monster, and who protects Odd Eyes monsters from attacks and battle damage when it's in defense mode. It lets you target a level 1 monster in your grave and special summon it without its effects, but requires you to immediately use it as part of a synchro summon. Performapal Lizard Draw lets you draw a card for each Performapal on your field when another monster you control is destroyed by your opponent. Its Pendulum effect lets you sacrifice it to draw another card if you have another Performapal in your other Pendulum zone. Performapal Hip Hippo is an old staple from back in the day, and it can be used to tribute summon a level 7 or higher monster after it's normal summoned. Performapal Flip Hippo is similar in that it lets you special summon another Performapal without its effects after it's been normal summoned, and it can change all of your monsters to defense mode. Performapal Trump Witch can be tributed to add polymerization to the hand from the deck or the graveyard, and its Pendulum effect allows you to fusion summon without polymerization, but only using monsters on your field, none from the hand. Performapal Pendulum Sorcerer can destroy 1 or 2 cards on your field to add the same number of Performapals to your hand from the deck when it's special summoned. Its Pendulum effect boosts the attack of all Performapals on your field by 1,000 if a Performapal monster is Pendulum summoned. And Performapal Gatling Ghoul is a fusion monster that combines 1 Performapal with a level 5 or higher Dark monster. When it's summoned, you burn your opponent for 200 points of damage for each card on the field. Then, if you used a Pendulum card as one of its materials, you can destroy 1 monster on your enemy's field and burn them for even more damage equal to that monster's attack points. Then we have a Performapal who actually comes from the Supreme King line, Performapal Celestial Magician, which is pretty much a reincarnation of the original Zark's memories as a new monster spirit, a piece of Yuya that became a dual monster card after he put himself back together at the end of Arc 5. This card has 4 monster effects, each of which is activated the turn that it's summoned based on what other types of monsters you have on your field. If you control a fusion monster, Celestial Magician can attack directly. If you control a Synchro monster, your opponent can't activate monster effects. If you control an Xyz monster, it doubles its attack points, and if you control a Pendulum card, you can add a Pendulum monster from the deck to your hand. Additionally, its Pendulum effect lets you sacrifice it to bring back a single Fusion, Synchro, or Xyz monster that is destroyed by battle or card effects that turn. So, to be clear, if your opponent uses a card that destroys multiple monsters, this effect doesn't trigger. It's only if they attack or destroy 1 monster with 1 move. Supreme Rage is a trap card that only works if you control Supreme King Zark. You can destroy as many of your own monsters as possible except Zark in order to summon up to 4 different Supreme King dragons from your hand, deck, extra deck, or graveyard. This card can be banished from the grave to attach 2 Supreme King dragons in your grave or extra deck to an Xyz Supreme King dragon on your field. Next up, we have the Supreme King Dimensional Dragons, Supreme King Dragon Odd Eyes, Starving Venom, Clear Wing, and Dark Rebellion. These are corrupted versions of the original 4 Dimension Dragons that Zark used during his duel with the Lancers. Supreme King Dragon Odd Eyes can be special summoned by tributing 2 Supreme King Dragons on your field. Any Pendulum monster on your field doubles its battle damage to your opponent, and this card can be tributed during the battle phase to special summon 2 Supreme King Dragon or Supreme King Gate monsters from the extra deck in defense position. Its Pendulum effect lets you tribute a Supreme King Dragon card to destroy this card and add a Pendulum monster with 1500 or less attack points to your hand from the deck. Supreme King Dragon Starving Venom requires you to combine 2 Dark Pendulum monsters in order to be summoned, though you don't have to use a polymerization card if you're only using monsters that are already on your field. Each turn, it can target another monster on the field in order to steal its name and its original effect, and it also inflicts piercing damage when it battles defense position monsters. Now, it is worth noting that Supreme King Dragon Starving Venom is currently banned in the TCG, so if that bothers you, I would recommend swapping this card out for Wisdom Eye Magician. It was one of the cards that we did want to include in this deck profile, but ran out of slots, so do with that what you will. Supreme King Dragon Clearwing must be synchro summoned using a tuner and one or more Dark Pendulum monsters. When summoned, it can destroy all face-up enemy monsters. If it battles an enemy monster, that monster is automatically destroyed and its attack is dealt to the enemy as damage. It can also be special summoned from the grave by tributing 2 Supreme King Dragon monsters. And Supreme King Dragon Dark Rebellion is a rank 4 Xyz monster that requires you to overlay 2 Dark Pendulum monsters. You can detach 1 unit from this card when it battles an enemy monster in order to steal all of that monster's attack points. This monster can also be returned to the extra deck during the battle phase to special summon 1 or 2 face-up Supreme King Dragon or Supreme King Gate monsters from your extra deck in defense mode. Then we have the man, the monster himself, Supreme King Dragon Zark. Born when the human Zark used the Astrograph Sorcerer to fuse with his 4-dimensional dragon cards. This monster is summoned by fusing a Fusion, a Synchro, an Xyz, and a Pendulum Dragon monster, all with one another. When it's fused onto the field, it destroys all enemy cards. It can't be targeted or destroyed by enemy card effects, and when it battles and destroys an enemy monster, you can special summon a Supreme King Dragon from the deck or the extra deck. If this monster is destroyed by battle or card effects, you can place it in the Pendulum Zone, where its pendulum effect negates the effects of enemy Fusion, Synchro, and Xyz monsters. And, once per turn, if the enemy adds a card or cards to their hand except during the draw phase, those cards are destroyed. And last for the side deck, we have an interesting card that likely gives us some insight into where this archetype is going to be going in the future, and that card is Supreme King Zark Synchro Universe. It requires Dark Pendulum non-tuner monsters to summon, and its name is Supreme King Zark when it's on the field. If this monster destroys an enemy monster in battle or inflicts battle damage, you can special summon 1 or 2 Supreme King Dragons from your deck, extra deck, or grave in defense position. And, if this card is destroyed, it can go into the Pendulum Zone. Its Pendulum effect lets you tribute a Supreme King Dragon or Supreme King Gate monster in order to special summon itself back onto the main field. Presumably this card implies that we're going to be getting a Supreme King Zark Fusion or Xyz Universe card at some point in the future, but not so far. But that does it for the side deck. Moving on to the extra deck, we'll start with the non-dimensional monsters in this lineup, such as Enlightenment Paladin, Nirvana High Paladin, and Magician of Hope. Enlightenment Paladin first appeared during the Friendship Cup in the Arc 5 Synchro storyline. If it's summoned using a Magician Pendulum monster, you can add a spell in your grave to your hand. It also burns your opponent for their monster's attack points when this card destroys a monster by battle. Nirvana High Paladin can use a Pendulum-summoned Pendulum monster as a tuner, and, if you do, you can add a card in your grave to your hand. When it destroys an enemy monster by battle, you can cut your enemy's life points in half. And, when this card is destroyed, it can be placed in the Pendulum Zone. Its Pendulum effect protects your Pendulum monsters who attack from being destroyed by battle and prevents battle damage. And, if one of your Pendulum monsters is attacked, all enemy monsters lose attack points equal to that Pendulum monster's attack for the rest of the turn. Magician of Hope can be Pendulum summoned directly from the extra deck if you have the ability to Pendulum summon level 4 monsters. You can detach a unit from this card to special summon a level 7 or lower Pendulum monster from your hand in defense position without its effects and then move Magician of Hope into the Pendulum Zone. However, if this monster is Pendulum summoned, you can attach a Pendulum card in your graveyard to this card. Its Pendulum effect allows you to sacrifice this card in order to negate one attack. Next, we have 2 monsters that Yuya learned to summon when he first learned about fusion summoning: Rune Eye's Pendulum Dragon and Beast Eye's Pendulum Dragon. Rune Eyes is summoned by fusing Odd Eye's Pendulum Dragon with a Spellcaster. If either of its materials were Pendulum summoned before fusing, it's unaffected by card effects for the turn that it was summoned. If the Spellcaster monster used was level 4 or lower, Rune Eyes can attack twice each turn, but if it was level 5 or higher, it can attack 3 times every turn. Beast Eyes is summoned by fusing Odd Eyes with a Beast-type monster, and can be summoned without a fusion card if you're only using monsters that were already on the field. When it destroys an enemy monster by battle, it burns the enemy for the attack points of the Beast-type monster that was originally used to summon it. That brings us to the 3-dimensional dragons that Yuya obtained from his spiritual siblings, with those being Yuri's Starving Venom Fusion Dragon, Yugo's Clear Wing Synchro Dragon, and Yuto's Dark Rebellion Xyz Dragon. Starving Venom Fusion Dragon requires 2 dark monsters from the field to be summoned. When it is, it can increase its attack points by the value of an enemy special summoned monster until the end of the turn. It can also target an enemy level 5 or higher monster and acquire its name and effect until the end of the turn. If it's destroyed, you can also destroy all of your enemy's special summoned monsters at the same time. Clear Wing Synchro Dragon can negate a high-level enemy monster's effects and destroy the monster that tried to activate it. It can also do this as a quick effect on your opponent's turn when their high-level monster activates a targeting effect. It also steals the attack points of any monster that it destroys until the end of the turn. And Dark Rebellion Xyz Dragon is a rank 4 Xyz monster requiring 2 overlay units to summon. It can detach both of its overlay materials to steal half of an enemy monster's attack points. Now, all 3 of these Dimension Dragons have the ability to evolve with Odd Eye's Pendulum Dragon, giving Yuya access to Odd Eye's Venom Dragon, Odd Eye's Wing Dragon, and Odd Eye's Raging Dragon. And because Yuto was around longer than Yuri and Yugo, we'll also throw in the second Xyz upgrade, Odd Eye's Rebellion Xyz Dragon. Odd Eye's Venom Dragon can be fused using Odd Eyes and a Starving Venom monster, or can be Pendulum summoned. It can target an enemy monster each turn to boost itself by that monster's attack points until the end of the turn, while also copying that monster's name and effect. And its Pendulum effect lets you boost one of your fusion monsters by 1,000 attack points for every enemy monster on the field until the end of the turn. Odd Eye's Wing Dragon requires a Dark Tuner monster and a Clear Wing monster to be synchro summoned. It has 2 effects, only one of which you can use each turn. It can either target an enemy monster and negate its effects until the end of the turn, or, during the battle phase, you can destroy all level 5 or higher monsters your enemy controls. Its Pendulum effect activates once per turn during a battle, giving your battling monster a boost of attack points equal to the monster it's battling until the battle's over. Odd Eye's Raging Dragon is a rank 7 Xyz monster that can also be Pendulum summoned straight from the extra deck if you have the ability to Pendulum summon level 7 monsters. If it's Xyz summoned using an Xyz monster as material, it can attack twice each turn, and you can detach a unit to destroy all cards on your enemy's field and boost this card's attack points by 200 for each one. Its Pendulum effect lets you place any Pendulum monster from your deck into the other Pendulum zone if it's empty. And Odd Eye's Rebellion Xyz Dragon is another rank 7 Xyz monster that requires 2 level 7 Pendulum monsters to summon. Like Raging Dragon, it can also be Pendulum summoned if you have the ability to Pendulum summon level 7 monsters. It can't be used as an Xyz material on the turn that it was summoned, but you can detach one material from this card to target 2 enemy monsters with 3,000 or fewer attack points and destroy them. And its Pendulum effect lets you special summon it back to the field and attach a dark monster in your grave to it as a material. But how do you get any of these monsters into your Pendulum zone? Well, it's easy. If any of these monsters are destroyed while they're on the main field, they can be moved directly into the Pendulum zone instead of going to the graveyard or the extra deck. And because this is a truly modern deck profile, it wouldn't be complete without every summoning method being represented. So we have 2 link monsters to include: Beyond the Pendulum and Exceed the Pendulum. Beyond the Pendulum is a Link 2 monster that requires at least 1 Pendulum monster to be Link summoned. If it's summoned to the extra monster zone, you can pay 1,200 life points to add a Pendulum monster from the deck to the hand, but all monster and Pendulum effects are negated for the rest of the turn unless you perform a Pendulum summoning after summoning this monster. This card can also destroy 2 cards on the field if 2 different level monsters are Pendulum summoned into the monster zones that it points to. Exceed the Pendulum is a Link 3 monster that requires 2 or more effect monsters to summon, including 1 Pendulum monster. It gains 100 attack points for each Pendulum monster you control. When it's Link summoned, you can add a face-up Pendulum monster from your extra deck to your hand. If your Pendulum zones are filled, you can also special summon a Pendulum monster whose level is between your Pendulum scales from your graveyard. And last but certainly not least, we have Yuya's newest ultimate monster. The card he probably went through hell and back to obtain, the purified version of the Supreme King Zark, Odd Eye's Arcray Dragon. This card's name is always treated as Supreme King Zark, and it has the same fusion summoning requirements as Supreme King Zark, but it can also be special summoned by tributing Supreme King Zark. When it's summoned from the extra deck, you can place any Pendulum monster in your deck into the Pendulum zone, and if this monster is destroyed, it goes into the Pendulum zone. This monster is special summoned back to the monster zone of the field, while the other card returns to the deck, or if the other monster would go back to the extra deck, like a Fusion, Synchro, or Xyz Pendulum monster, that monster can be special summoned right alongside Arcray Dragon, meaning you could potentially get 2 very high-level, high-attack monsters onto your field at the same time. And that does it for this Yuya Sakaki modern-day deck profile. Man, oh man, was this one a long one to get through. And for anyone who's curious, I just said the word pendulum 182 times. It has officially lost all meaning to me. Also, there were so many honorable mention cards that we wanted to include that didn't make the cut. The Dimension Dragon archetypes have grown and expanded in so many different directions, and there was just no way to fit all of them into a single profile. But what do you think of the cards in this Yuya Sakaki deck profile? Are these the sort of cards that you think he would use today, or are there other cards you think we should have included instead? Let me know your thoughts down below in the comments, and if you haven't already, hit the subscribe bell thing if you want to see more modern deck profiles in the future. You can find this deck profile available on YGO Pro. A huge shout out to Wham Bam Duel for helping me create this profile. You can find a link to his channel down below in the description, as well as a link to a video he made on how to most effectively use this deck profile. We'll be hard at work putting together next week's Modern Playmaker deck profile. So again, do the subscribe bell thing if you want to see that, and I will catch you in the next video. Bye!